I consider it an affront to my family that you haven't heard about Anchor. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. Okay, let me just lay this out for you. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And get this, okay? Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money, moolah, from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Open loops. Open loops. Open loops. Open loops. Open loops. You must listen to the open loops, a theme park for absurd beliefs and systems of integration between the mind and the creative spirit. Open loops.
Craving some intellectual stimulation? Want to go on a head trip, but you've got no destination? Well, you've come to the right place. My name is Greg Bornstein. I'm your host. I'm your curator of experience. And most importantly, I am the chief looper here at Open Loops. Conversations that bend. It's a theme park for the intellect, the imagination, intellectual escapists, sapiosexuals, the shamelessly fringe curious. You're all welcome here. Let's go off on a distant journey to a place where things are definitely not natural. They're entirely supernatural, but not in waking everyday reality. Now, unless you're going with that whole, like, Alan Moore, the guy who wrote Watchmen and very prolific comic graphic artist, who's also a real-life magician. He's all about how words are magic spells and fiction is just as powerful as real life and it's magic manifested, yeah, that's a nice kind of spin on magic, but for the sake of this episode, we're going to separate fiction as fiction. Yes, later on, the next couple episodes, I interview people who actually do see entities that some would describe as unearthly, supernatural, on the astral plane. People that actually see vampires may actually be vampires. We're going there. But on this special episode, we have a writer who writes about this stuff and really has not experienced any paranormal phenomena whatsoever. But I was curious about delving into the mindscape of Todd Sullivan, my guest, because he does view the world from a different perspective. The idea of the outwardly quiet person with the vibrantly visual, violent, perhaps even suggestive inner landscape always intrigues me, because when you hypnotize someone, you know that there's so much more there than what necessarily comes out on the surface. And for Todd, who doesn't do a lot of podcasts, or hadn't at that time, hadn't really talked too much about his work. I'd read a few interviews and whatnot. I wanted to get in his brain a little bit. Did I succeed? Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I enjoyed the conversation. You'll see what happens in the interview. At one point, I questioned the entire thing because I'm like, am I asking too many questions? And then I ask him about that. And there's kind of that byplay. He insists he had a good time. You'll see. I enjoy talking to Todd. I love seeing the origins of this stuff. And clearly, if you are able to envision it and write it down in a way that's compelling, but also just keeps you engaged as the writer, surely somebody else will be. And the fact that we all connected these stories means there's something that's a part of us that makes them real. So we'll go away from reality for a second. We'll go away from ghost hunters and ufologists. And we're going to go entirely into the realm of one of my favorite genres, horror fiction, with writer, creator, artist, all sorts of different labels you can give them. Todd Sullivan. If you enjoy the show, please do like, subscribe, rate, review on Apple Podcasts. Definitely very helpful. And now, without further ado, vampires. So today I have Todd Sullivan, a writer, a martial arts practitioner, a teacher of English as a second language, a man that, well, you do a lot of things, Todd. Honestly, I'm very curious because, as I was reading over some of the work that you do, well, first of all, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. I was curious because you know what you wanted to talk about. You said, "Hey, I'd love to be in the podcast, and I'd love to talk about what I practice." So, tell me this: beyond being a writer, beyond being a teacher, and doing like martial arts and whatnot, what else do you practice?
I beyond being a writer and beyond being a teacher, I guess I practice paying attention to what's going on around me. I mean, that's very important for being a writer. So I'm aware of the cultural situations that I'm in. I try to learn as much as possible. That's why I travel around the world. I lived in Korea for 10 years, and I got to know Korea quite well. I'm here in Taiwan, and I'm learning the culture here in Taiwan. I've studied Mandarin, which is the main language here. I work in a Taiwanese school, so I'm around Taiwanese people all day, every day. So I guess I practice trying to get to know as much as possible, just acquiring as much experience and knowledge as I possibly can.
Yeah, how'd you end up over there? I mean, I'm kind of curious, it seems like you've landed in a particular section of the world. I wonder if were you did you or where are you from originally? Are you from America, the United States, or?
Yes, I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana.
Oh wow. Do you well that's already opens up a lot of questions in my head about doing horror and the connection between that upbringing and like wanting to explore more supernatural paranormal realms. But beyond that, I mean, how'd you end up in like Taiwan?
So what happened was that during my MFA program in New York, I randomly did a winter semester in Japan. It was like 3 weeks long.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in Japan, I was in Tokyo, and I really loved it. Like it was, I don't know if many of your audience have been to Japan or Tokyo before, but it's really a fantastic city, really interesting.
It's the one place in the world I want to go, man. That is top of the list. Japan is at the top.
I mean, definitely suggest you go there. It's really a great experience. And, from the moment you get off the plane, this is my first experience in Asia also, but it's just such a really cool, interesting, quite different place from America. And so I was in Tokyo for 3 weeks. I was studying Japanese authors and Japanese theater. And I knew I wanted to come back. And the easiest way really to come back to this part of the world is to teach English. But the issue is that Japan doesn't hire a lot of English teachers. They actually are not very big on important culture in Japan. And so it's not really easy to get a job in Japan. I mean, you could go there and visit, but getting a job there is not easy. But when I was looking for work 11 years ago, Korea was really hiring a lot of people, like really sucking in all the English teachers from Western countries. So I ended up in Korea, and I was there for 10 years. And then after Korea, I was looking for a new country to go to. And again, I just started sending out my resume at different places, and I saw a decent job opportunity here in Taiwan. So I ended up in Taiwan, Taipei, Taiwan. And that's how I got here.
Wow, wow. So I mean, do you plan on, is there more of the world to explore in your mind that you haven't yet, or?
There is. When I went to Korea, I was 31. I'm 42 now, and I did notice that it wasn't as acclimated to Taiwan as it was to Korea. Like, I feel the difference of 11 years, honestly. But yeah, I mean, and also COVID-19. So my plan was to go to a different country in maybe another year, less than a year. But
Right.
because of COVID-19, my plans, like everyone else's in the world, has changed. So for now, I can't really answer the question. But if things calm down in the next 12 months, I probably will end up going somewhere else.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, look, yeah, let's go back. I mean, I'm sort of curious. Do you think that I also haven't spent a lot of time in New Orleans, but I want to. I recently had a friend that went there, and she was like, she's a little more scientifically minded, but she was still telling me that she felt that at certain moments when she was going to certain places, she felt that there was sort of dark energies around. Obviously, it's got this sort of idea in culture. New Orleans is voodoo and they're witches and stuff like that. I mean, did any of that stuff impact you as a kid or growing up that like sort of rubbed off in your creation of horror?
Yeah, I definitely did. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, and one of the main attractions of New Orleans are the above ground graveyards. And people who don't know, in most of the rest of America, you bury bodies 6 feet deep. But in New Orleans, because we're below sea level, you can't because you hit water. So our graves are actually above ground. And there's all these interesting, very gothic mausoleums and cemeteries and all these, just constant reminder of death. So this is a constant, something you're constantly dealing with when you live in New Orleans. You can't really avoid the fact that one day you will die and like death kind of surrounds you. But New Orleans also has a very big Catholic population. There's a very big Baptist population. There's voodoo. I mean, people hang garlic on windows to make evil spirits go away. There's the French choirs. So, and then of course there's also Anne Rice, who did Interview with the Vampire.
Yes.
The Vampire. So there's a rich culture of spiritualism and kind of darker gothic elements in New Orleans, plus horror. I don't know, again, if your audience are aware of the movie Angel Heart that Robert De Niro was in.
Right,
there's just like this tradition of kind of horror that pervades New Orleans.
Did you ever have anything that you would classify as a paranormal experience?
I wouldn't say that, no. I mean, in paranormal experience, like my publisher, Nightmare Press, that's what he does. That's what they do. They do paranormal books mostly. And they actually they go around America and characterize paranormal experiences in different places. And so, like, I've talked to him, I've listened to him many times. I don't think I've had anything similar to that, no. I don't think so.
Really? So you've never, I mean, I imagine there are psychics and, all that kind of stuff going on, depending on, some are more real than others. Did anyone in your family ever, like, meet with someone practicing spiritualism or voodoo and run to you and say, like, Todd, this stuff is real. I'm telling you, it's scary. Like, did you have any of that growing up?
Growing up, no. Believe it or not, my childhood was very quite ordinary and normal. So not really. I mean, I think I read a lot of different kind of things. I have a very strong imagination. I listen a lot, but personally, I think my family is just kind of, I guess, more not quite that interesting, I suppose.
No, I mean, look, I'm sure it definitely, well, that if it wasn't going on outside your head, it's definitely something that was going on inside of it. I mean, do you think that when you were you a quiet kid? Like, did anybody know that you had this level of imagination growing up?
I was definitely a quiet kid. I spent a lot of time by myself. Honestly, I was born with a speech impediment, so for a long time, I didn't really speak much at all as a child. And then I did many years of speech therapy. And as a result, I spent a lot of time reading. I spent a lot of time in silence, and then I spent a lot of time writing. So yeah, I mean, definitely, quiet kid was what I was.
Interesting. Yeah, I kind of think whenever I think some Stephen Colbert or someone made a joke about that. Stephen King is clearly everything that he's put out is just like a clear statement that my childhood sucked. I wonder if, now the thing is, the stuff you're writing about, I mean, I'm talking, you have the Windshine Chronicles, which is dark fantasy. You have this vampire series that is, I mean, it looks very interesting, the vampire series of extreme horror. And I know I've read that you take a lot of the characters that you've encountered across the world and in your life and sort of transform them into perhaps people with more fantastical journeys than you did. What parts of you, Todd, show up in the writing, you think?
I think, I mean, the foundation of all the writing is the person who writes it. So I am the first level, I suppose. And then the second level are the people and the events that I see and experience in life. And then the third level is my imagination, and also, just writing type stuff like plot, characterization, things like this. So it's like a multi-level to my writing, but I am the first level. I mean, it all comes, of course, from me. So I'm I guess the alpha in the writing itself.
Right. I mean, are there any sort of particular themes that, I mean, like I'm reading, if we look at the description of Butchers, which came out this past November, vampire series of extreme horror, Butchers, available on Amazon. It says kidnapped, turned, and locked away in a concrete basement. High school student, say me, is taught the ways of the damned. I mean, were you ever locked away in a concrete basement? Did you ever feel like you were in that kind of position in high school? Like, are there any themes of that from your life that went directly into your writing if people know you well enough?
The interesting thing about that is that Butchers comes from a novel that I sold to a publisher that eventually went bankrupt. And so the initial novel, Natural Police, had slightly different characters in it, and then I changed them over time.
Huh.
So the first iteration of Seimi was actually called Jonghyung, and she was actually older. She was a university student.
Mm-hmm.
But then as I started writing, as I kind of broke the novel apart and started putting it back together, because I wanted to last for quite some time. So there's going to be some growth to all the characters. It's going to be like an ongoing novella series, whereas before it was just a novel.
Right.
And so I started her off a bit younger, and then she's going to, well, I mean, she's a vampire, so they don't really age, but she's going to kind of grow mentally and emotionally as the novella series goes on from book to book. So it's really that's really kind of like an artistic choice to make her like a graduating high school student. So she's really about 17, 18 years old. It was kind of like an artistic choice more than anything.
Yeah, it's like a coming of age story, a classic coming of age kind of story.
Right, yeah, but spread out over a series. So it's like a coming of age story spread out over, 5, 10, however many books I end up writing. But, I have read a lot. I've read a lot of different books, and I read the news a lot. So I think, again, all this kind of stuff influences where I write and how I write. And maybe they're locked in the basement. Unfortunately, there are stories like that in the news.
Yeah.
Perfect example of this is that I wrote a lycanthrope story, which is a story where it were tigers who transformed into humans.
Huh.
And it took place in Korea. And the way the tigers transform into humans, it's kind of a grotesque way, but they have to kind of feed upon a human's face, and then they become a human themselves. And that comes directly from a news story. There was this really weird situation in America where this mother and father took their university age son out to a restaurant, and they were just sitting there eating. And then the university age son gets really upset. He leaves. He goes back home, and he attacks his neighbors, and he actually chews off their face. And it literally comes from that story. So yeah, I mean, I just take things that I read and I kind of transform it in order to be part of where I'm writing. But yeah, I mean, I read a lot, so there's a lot of very grotesque things that happen in life.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask about, your sort of other horror influences. I mean, one of the interviews you were talking about one of your siblings had Stephen King. I mean, did you ever? I definitely went through a phase. I went through a phase in college where I devoured Stephen King stuff, but it opened me up to like a lot of these very very niche, very small, and very, frankly, disturbing horror writers that were kind of popular like in the early 80s. I don't know if you're familiar with like the splatter punk movement, which was deliberately just like raw, just almost, oh man, over eroticized and bloody violent horror for a period of time. And I just was like, whoa, I'm fascinated by the idea that a writer can make me feel a certain way. Like the point, I think what's interesting about horror, and I actually am curious about this with you. To me, horror reminded me a lot of comedy. I've heard them compared before, but I intuitively understood because in comedy, you are deliberately trying to get the laugh. Good horror, in my book, and Stephen King, I've heard talk about this, you are actually trying to go for a reaction. You're trying to get like an unconscious reaction from somebody that is and leaving their waking life trance and going into yours. Do you think about horror in that way at all? Like, do you ever think about deliberately concocting sentences so that they scare a reader?
I do try to create scenes that have a jarring effect on the reader. This is true. Horror, I do think horror is trying to create a reaction and a very strong visceral reaction in people. But I also think that it's a bit of a cautionary. It's like a way of, because, you can try to explain something to people in a rational way, and it could go in one area and not the other. But I mean, if you scare them, I think they may end up following or listening a lot more closely. So I do
Yeah.
think horror is a way of cautioning people against certain things, or just warning them that this could be the consequence. This consequence could be quite terrible. So you might not want to do it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's to react, but I think it's also a way of cautioning people.
That's interesting. Do you think that people, like your friends and people in your life, do they know that this, if they didn't know that you were a writer, would they know that you have all these weird ideas in your head?
No, I don't think. I think unless I tell people, they would probably not guess I was a writer at all, actually. And they would probably never guess that I do horror writing. But just on this at the same time, I do different kinds of writing. So I do horror writing, I do fantasy writing, I do science fiction, I also do children's literature and YA literature. It's just that the horror writing and the fantasy writing is what has actually come out first and had the most amount of success. So I kind of do like a wide spectrum of writing. But no, people would not guess that I'm a horror. I do horror also. It probably surprised them, honestly.
Have you ever slipped up like you're eating dinner with someone and you start talking about like, oh yeah, there's a finger in that food that's rotting and it's turning green and like, do you ever accidentally like, or in a much more poetically stated way, but have you ever said anything and people are like, Todd, what? Like anything
I
like that ever happen?
Actually, I do much less talking than what I'm doing right now. Generally, I'm a listener and I'm an observer. So if I'm at dinner with a group of people, generally they're talking around me, and I'm actually just kind of there on the periphery, listening to what they're saying, and thinking about the way they say something, thinking about how this could become a scene, a story. I mean, I do see the world through kind of a writer's eyes, and so everything to me is plot, characterization, dialogue. That's basically how I kind of break down things that happen around me. So no, honestly not. I'm probably not talking very much person at any table.
Wow. I'm curious why you why you're doing the podcast circuit. Is there something that is it almost like an exercise for you and like opening up when you go on someone's podcast and you talk about your work? Because it almost seems like you don't often do it.
No, I actually do. This is probably I've done quite a few now. And I did my first one maybe as soon as Butchers came out. I did a podcast. And it's my first one. I've never done it before, but I find it pretty interesting because this is more concentrated conversation, I feel.
Yeah.
But it's also a promotionary thing. A very long time ago, like 20 years ago, I actually self-published a book, a collection of short stories, poems, and novella called 1 Hour. And that actually was also horror. But it was a bit kind of different horror because I was 20 years old at the time. So it was actually a bit different. And when I self-published this book, I promoted it for a year. And what I did was I drove throughout Southeast America. So I drove to like Texas. I was living in Atlanta at the time. So I drove to Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida. And I drove all over, and I would have these book signings. And I would stop at different places with my books. And I would, do a meet and greet at these book signs that I set up with. So it was always me interacting with the public. And sometimes a weekend, I would end up interacting with, several hundred people, depending on how crowded the venue was. And so, when you're promoting yourself, you have to communicate with people. You have to talk. You have to let people know who you are because the world is very crowded. And you have to make your voice heard, make people realize who you are. So, this is just part of the job, I think. This is a part of being a writer or being an artist in general.
Do you feel okay doing it? Like, do you secretly hate this right now?
No, I don't. I have another one scheduled later on this week. I do this all the time. I do this all the time now. And this is the only way. I live in Taipei, Taiwan. I can't really promote myself in America. But even if I was in America, COVID-19, people are not doing book signings right now.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, look, it is amazing that, I was reading one of your, it looks like it was a recent blog post. It must have had you on it as guest blog, and you were talking about the idea of you see the world like the Matrix idea being there, but it's not numbers. It's words. And already like, okay, great, Todd, you've proved it. You're a good writer. Like, great, good work. But second, I'm like, that's an interesting idea that, when people speak, I see words, but it almost is like when you live, when you breathe, when you're looking at people, you're seeing the imagination explored on the written paper. It's kind of an interesting framework. Can you even, in this past week, have you sat somewhere and been like, oh, yeah, this would be a great book? Like, does that just happen to you all the time? How does inspiration come up for you?
It does come from what I see around me. I wouldn't think a great book, but I would think a great scene. I would think usually this would be a great scene, not so much a book. But yeah, honestly, I do see things through the eyes of a writer. I've been doing it for so long now, and so that's how I perceive, the world and people themselves as characters, and as I see plots and subplots and narrative and things like this. But I've just been doing this I've been involved in writing and writing craft for so long that it's just how it has turned out.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and look, and to your earlier point that you don't just write horror, I can see how some people would think that a genre like that would be a trap. In the same way that, a comedic, again, not to harp on it, but, if you're a comedian and you're that's how people primarily know you, it's going to be hard for you in at least to have the public be like, oh, wait a minute, he's trying to now be a serious actor. Do you sort of think that, how conscious are you of like what happens if the books that get the most success are horror for the rest of your career? Like, are you going to be upset that you weren't able to do another genre? Like, have you thought about that? Does it plague you at night, or would you be okay with having a career where you still created your work, but people still responded the most to the horror?
I think that, despite the fact that I do different genres, it's always a bit darker. Like, even the children's literature that I did, it was more, I guess, akin to, what's his name? Roald Dahl.
Roald Dahl. Yeah.
Because like a lot of people don't realize, like,
very dark.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, because the witches are literally eating kids. So are the giants. This is a very common theme of Roald Dahl.
Yes.
Eating upon of children, and one wonders if he actually liked children, considering how he treated them in his fiction. But yeah, so even my children's literature is a bit on the darker side. So I do think that I don't know if I would become known as a horror writer, but I probably would become known as a writer who makes things a bit more dark, I suppose, than not dark. I guess that's the way to put it.
Interesting. Out of curiosity, have you resolved the debate? I know you went through an internal debate about, are you an artist? Are you a writer? Are you an author? What are you right now?
At this moment, I'm probably more of an artist and a writer. I just think that author, that's just such like when I grew up in the 80s, it's just such a big word that I don't really like to use it quite so often or quite so freely. So I wouldn't say author. Plus, I also think my personal belief is only my personal belief. I think that that's something that other people have to eventually call you. I'm not exactly sure about, calling yourself an author, but, if people want to, that's totally cool. I mean, I have no problem with the people doing it. But for me, it's probably artists because my lifestyle is one of an artist, I believe. And also writer, because it's what I do. I'm always writing. So artist and writer, but not so much author, no.
Wow. Has your family read your work?
They have. They have read. Well, let me rephrase that. My mom has read most of my work. She's the reader in the family, and then I have siblings who don't read quite so much, but they've read a couple of things here and there. So they have read my work. Yes.
I wonder if they knew that all this stuff was in your head growing up, or were they surprised at anything they've read?
I mean, I've been writing for a very long time. Like even back 1 hour, like the collection short stories, poems, and novella. It was of a similar nature, but again, it was written by someone who was 20 years old. So I mean, it's been like that was 22 years ago. So yeah, they're well aware of what I write about.
That's very cool. Very cool. Well, good. I'm glad that you haven't had to tell your family and sit them down and have this long conversation about, hey guys, I'm going to start putting stuff out to the world. And it's a little different than what you might have been used to, Todd, growing up. But I mean, that's awesome that you went to school for it. You've been doing it for so long. Do you like horror movies at all? Do you like fantasy movies? Does the genre and films interest you at all? Or is it just books?
Well, this is the funny thing. I don't really watch much horror, and I don't really read much horror either, because the visceral nature of the scenes, particularly horror movies, I think is a bit overwhelming for me. I do see things quite clearly in my head, and I'm very empathetic, so I'm really there in the scene. So I try not to do it quite too often. I mean, I have, of course, but not too often. I mean, I think the genre that I probably read most for pleasure is fantasy, and then science. I started reading more science fiction in university, but I think fantasy was always my go-to genre. Honestly, throughout high school and even now, I read more. Probably no, now it's like half and half. I realize science fiction and fantasy.
Yeah. Do you say that when you're writing, do you kind of like what is the Todd that people would see? Like I've heard before that, and again, I'm going to harp back. It seems to be a common theme for my podcast, but I can't escape it. There were some hypnotists that were, I read something. I have a hypnotherapy background and hypnotist background, and they were talking about Aldous Huxley. And when Aldous Huxley would write, apparently he'd actually go into like a concentrated, highly focused trance state where it was like you couldn't really even shake him out of it. It was like you would just see him kind of go into another world. His focus would go straight towards maybe the pen or the paper, and it would almost be like he was like catatonic to everything around him. Are you do you have any writing rituals? Like if people saw you in full creative mode, like does everybody have to be in the room and you just have to focus? Like what is Todd writing like?
Well, I wake up in the morning, I get coffee, and I write one single unique page a day, and then for the rest of the day, I revise. So that's basically my writing process: a single page in the morning, and then I revise the story throughout the day.
Does it
But
look
as
pretty
for
normal? Yeah, does it look pretty normal, or would it be like, sorry to interrupt, but like, would people think you could be working on a spreadsheet at a Starbucks, or are you in a different place in your head?
No, I believe it probably looks pretty normal. I'm just sipping coffee and writing. So I'm pretty sure. And I write on paper. Like I write with pen and paper first, everything first. So yeah, it probably looks like well, it looks like I'm writing, but it doesn't look like I'm doing anything in particular. No, so it looks fairly normal.
Do you have nightmares?
I do. I've had nightmares, but it's not something that I frequently have. No. This country that I live in, I didn't sleep very well last night. This country I live in, Taipei, Taiwan, it's a nice country. Anyone can come and visit it. I definitely recommend it. But in the summer, there's a lot of bugs, and like I have trouble sleeping because there's just so many bugs and so many roaches and spiders, and so that kind of kept me
Mm.
up last night. But for the most part, that's not a nightmare. That's just like a condition of living in this place. But yeah, for the most part, no, I don't. I sleep well. I don't have nightmares.
Todd,
No.
Todd, like I'm so interested in the fact that like you are writing things that are from like a totally different mind space than most people occupy in waking reality, and yet like you seem to be pretty normal. Like you're like, oh, I mean, and normal, quote unquote, whatever that means, but like people would think you're writing. You don't have nightmares, never had a paranormal experience. You're a traveler. You look at people. I mean, you've got the artist perspective, which is unique, but there's nothing like you're not doing seances at night, and you don't have voodoo dolls, at least as far as I know. Do you think that am I the one person that's ever asked you about this? Like, I'm sure some people must be like, dude, what is your life? Where does the vampire series of extreme horror come from?
The interesting thing is that I mean, when I say I spent a lot of time in silence as a child, I really did. Like, I really spoke very little throughout kindergarten, elementary, middle, and high school, like extremely little. And then living here in foreign countries where it's not my native tongue, I actually speak a little Korean now, but I spent a lot of time in silence over the last 10, 11 years, like more than you can probably possibly imagine. So, I have a lot of time to think. And you compartmentalize. There's just different parts to yourself that you explore. And since I spend so much time in silence, then, I have a lot of time to just, ruminate upon different things I suppose most people would not. And perhaps that's where, the horror comes in, and then, the fantasy and the children's literature and stuff like that. I compartmentalize, I think, fairly well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's go into a little bit of the content of the book. When anybody ever tells me that they're writing a book about a secret society and you're combining the supernatural and it's vampires, my interest peaks up. I mean, what exactly? So there's an allegiance to a secret vampire society. I mean, where did that idea even come from? A secret organization of vampires?
Well, I mean, to be honest, that's actually somewhat not as original as all that. I mean, because Secret Society of Vampires has been done before. I think where I did it differently is that I started writing this after I went to Korea. And Korea they do Confucianism, which is very hierarchical. So there's someone who's at the top who kind of leads everyone else, and then everyone else just kind of follows. And it's a very rigid type of society. So I think that's where I do it differently. I kind of combine that Confucius ideology to kind of the somewhat common secret vampire society, and then kind of merge them together. So that's where the idea actually came from. It came from living in Korea, working in Korea with Koreans.
Wow. Do you speak more? I love Confucianism. Can you speak a little more about, the way that plays out? Like, what is your understanding of the way that sort of line of thinking is manifests now in Korea? Like, do people still really practice that seriously?
They do, and I won't speak too much about it because I don't want to seem like I'm an expert and then someone who's listening to me later on. But what I will say, I think the best is the age thing. So if we were to meet for the first time, what we would do is we would ask each other ages. So if I was older than you, you would then have to treat me in a different, in a way that as if I'm more superior to you or higher level than you, higher status to you. And I would treat you as if you were like a little brother or someone who is kind of lower status. And then the only way we can actually treat each other as friends is if we're the exact same age. And so in Korea, there's a word that you use for someone who's older. There's a word that you use for someone who's younger. And there's a word that you use for someone who's your exact same age. And this is actually very important. Trying to go outside this system seems very rude and just very weird, actually. And so that's what I mean by kind of a very strict way of thinking about it. Because in America, we just don't do that. I mean, we didn't ask each other ages when we first started our conversation. I didn't change the way I speak depending on, I'm sorry.
No, right. No, I was going to say, right. We didn't. We just went right into it.
Right. And there's like a grammar thing too. So if I am older than you, then you would speak to me with a different kind of grammar than I speak to you. But then when we're the same age and we speak a different kind of grammar, then we would speak to someone who's older or younger. And so it's just a very strict way of doing like social settings.
Wow. I'm very intrigued by the way this plays out in vampire society. What would you say is like the difference between, a Western secret vampire society and an Eastern one? Is there the status, I think status, no matter what, if you think of secret societies, at least in like, American colleges, there's always sort of the grand leader and then people respect them and, they're hierarchical structures. I mean, is that, would it be different? Would it really feel different to be in a vampire society in Korea versus America?
I think it'd be different to be in a vampire society in my novellas versus one in fiction written in America. My vampires are significantly more mean. There's a lot of torture that goes on when you step out of line. And that kind of reflects, I feel like, society here. I mean, it's very, being different in this part of the world isn't something that's commonly done. You kind of realize if you are, and it's very tough. So most people kind of stay in line. And there's good and bad, as with everything else. But in my books, versus I think of just a purely Western vampire book, yeah, I mean, when they step out of line, they are tortured, and it's very bad for them, and it's torture for a very long time. But
gosh, what kind of torture are these vampires doing? I don't want to give away your book. I don't want to, without giving away everything. Guys, check it out. The Vampire Series of Extreme Horror by Todd Sullivan on Amazon. Like, definitely support this man. But I mean, like, how bad are we talking here?
It's, if you read the reviews, you get a sense of it. I mean, can I just put it that way? Like, just read the reviews and you get a sense of perhaps the visceral nature of the books themselves. But definitely go out and get it. I mean, you go and read it, and then you can figure out for yourself the level of torture.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, Vampire Series of Extreme. So there are going to be 3. You've had 2 out so far. The second one came out in May.
It's going to be ongoing. There's going to be more than 3. But the third one is going to be longer than 2. Like the third one will probably be almost twice the length of the first 2. But they're going to get longer as they go along. But it's going to be an ongoing series. There's no real end to it.
Oh, interesting. Do you have like an ending in mind?
Well, because I wrote this as a novel before, I already know, like, it's already played out pretty well. I know where it's going. So yeah, I do have an ending in mind. Yes, I do. I have an ending in mind. Yes.
Oh, interesting. Very cool. Okay, so we talked a little bit about vampire secret societies. We've talked a little bit about vampire torture. I mean, who would you recommend not reading your book? Like, should they refer to the reviews again? Like, if someone is scared of blood, probably shouldn't read the book. I mean, who shouldn't? Who should we warn out there?
I don't know. I mean, it's extreme horror. So if you're not in extreme horror, this is not the book for you. I mean, yeah. I mean, just depends on what your tastes are, because the book is multi. I mean, there's a lot going on in it. There's a lot of kind of Korean culture in it that's kind of that people may find interesting. There's this story is about working a bad job, and that's the general idea of butchers. Like, you have a very, very bad job and it lasts forever. And that's a universal thing for many people. Many people have jobs they don't particularly enjoy, and they feel it's just torturous going in every day.
Did you have that?
I mean, I've had bad jobs. Yes, I've had bad jobs.
Like, was there? Yeah, I'm wondering if there was a period in your life where you just thought you would never be able to, pursue your dreams.
Yes, I mean, I think that's very common too. I mean, many people. I feel like I've been very lucky, or let's say very determined. I'll put it that way, be very determined, because when I was younger, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write books, and I wanted to live around the world, and I'm actually doing exactly that. But it took a lot of determination, just single-mindedness, in order to get to this point. So yeah, I guess I did achieve what I wanted to achieve.
What would you say to someone out there that wanted to follow your path in that way? Like, I definitely am someone that has fantasized about the idea of living what they call the digital nomadic lifestyle. Now, usually that applies to like writing blogs and selling, drop shipping things and stuff like that. But I'm curious, some people might be afraid to take that jump. I mean, how'd you even get to that single-mindedness where you're like, I can do this and make it my life?
Maybe this trait that I have. Like, I mean, your viewers again can't see this, but I have a tattoo of a rose on my hand. Actually, if you look at the pictures that I have that are taken of me online, you'll see it. And I decided to get this tattoo when I was in high school. And it was a way of reminding myself, no matter what I did as I went through life, that my goal was to be a writer. Like, that was the idea behind it. It's a constant reminder. And I think that if you really want to achieve something that's quite significant, but kind of quite difficult to actually achieve, you just have to have a very single-minded, determined way, because it's just not easy. There's so many things that kind of come into your way as life goes on. And it's easy to lose that path and, end up being somewhere you didn't really want to be. So just being single-minded and determined is my advice to people.
Was there ever a time where you almost could have not gone this way? Like, was there a moment that you had that was like, okay, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this? Or did you push past that? Did that even come up? Like, how does that work?
No, those moments happen. But, the way I live my life, I start cutting off different roads that I could take, like different outs I could take. In the end, it's almost as if, you burn the bridges behind you so that you can't really go back. Or you burn the bridges to the side so you can't really go to this way or that way. You only have one way to go. So even when you start to become like, oh, I can't do it, or it's too much, you have no other choice. So you just keep going forward.
Yeah. Do you think you're like a Stephen King type in the sense that, that guy just keeps penning books every hour, it seems like? Like, do you think you have that much in you that you could have like hundreds of books by the end of your career?
No, I could never imagine doing that, honestly. Like, I think that later on, I'll probably end up releasing very little writing, very few books, honestly. Like, I'll always write because I've been doing it for so long. It's like, habit. But I always write, but I would prefer to, honestly, I would prefer to teach. I would prefer to teach writing. I've picked up a lot about writing in life. So I would prefer to teach writing. I do this martial arts, maybe one day teach martial arts. Different things I would prefer to do, but just writing all the time, even to like my 60s, 70s, 80s, no, I don't think so.
Huh. Wow. Tell me a little bit about the Windshine Chronicles.
So the Windshine Chronicles is basically about what I was talking about, being single-minded. It's a group of men who go on these quests to become heroes. And the idea behind it was what is needed to achieve something significant in life and to kind of achieve this higher status, I suppose, in life. And so, in the metaphor are these quests, and it takes place in the fantasy middle age of Korea.
Wow, I wonder if like me asking about this was just fortuitous right after we talked about you being single-minded. I mean, there's no way that someone deciding to go on the hero's journey of being a writer didn't somewhat inform this. Do you think?
No, I think they're connected. They're definitely connected. The idea behind it, but this is like an old thing to me. Again, going back to 1 hour, it was about trying to become a writer when I was 20, and that's definitely when you start to feel like you can't do it. Definitely, I think when you're 20, 21, 22, when you're fresh out of high school into university, thinking about life, thinking about work, jobs like this, things like this, that you start to feel like you cannot do it. And so that was a theme that I wrote about even 22 years ago. And Hollow Man, the Windshine Chronicles, kind of picks up upon the same theme in a more mature, different way. But yeah, it kind of follows the same theme about doing everything you can in order to achieve this significant thing. But also, which is actually really important, the people on the way who actually die and don't make it, because in the end, a lot of people don't make it. I mean, they have not very good outcomes as they try to chase their dream.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, do you think those people, I mean, what's the lesson there then? Like, some would argue after watching this Michael Jordan documentary, I had people being like, wow, that guy chased his dream and he was great, but he lost a lot of friends and a lot of respect doing it. To me, that's a great example of questioning the worth of chasing your dream. I mean, have you figured it out? Like, what exactly does go wrong for someone when they become single-minded and focused on that? What can we take away from your exploration of that theme that's actually helpful for making sure we don't go down the wrong path?
Well, I mean, part of it is when you start eliminating all other paths because you're so single-minded, and then you cannot get off the one you've chosen, but then you're not going to succeed. You kind of burn out. I mean, you run into a dead end, and it's trying to get out of it becomes almost impossible. So that's part of it. I think people who are kind of obsessive about something are obsessive about something. I mean, they're not really always the best people to be around, who just seem to have like a single thought, and they don't really seem to be able to do much else beyond this single thing. So they're kind of anti-personal. Is that the word?
Right.
They may not be as good with people. They're not really people persons. People. So yeah, I mean, there's just different things that being very single-minded has when it comes to your social life and just your life in general.
Yeah, totally. What would you say is I was curious about this idea that you said that you believe you are like a I forget how you put it, and now I can't find where I was looking at this. I just had it on a page about you like believing that you're just kind of an observer walking around in a fantasy life. You put it much more eloquently. Is this life you're walking around a fantasy life in your mind still?
Well, again, I mean, I see things as fiction. So I suppose in that way, yeah. I mean, everything I see, I wonder how I can use it in narrative. So in that way, I suppose I do walk around making things into a fiction, I suppose.
Yeah, right. So okay. So we have if you don't like extreme horror, do not read the vampire books. If you do like seeing young men trying to pursue a dream but potentially being fallible, read the Windshine Chronicles. What other stuff? I mean, is there? Look, I want the scoop right now before anybody else gets it, Todd. I want to know, what other worlds have you not written yet that are on the horizon?
I want to go back to the children's literature and do some novellas with that. Right now, I'm thinking about, there's a guy that I met here who's Nigerian, and we're thinking about doing collaboration using Nigerian gods in a modern day setting. And so I'm thinking about doing that, how I would make that work. So that's actually, I suppose, the newest thing is that whole the Nigerian gods in a modern day setting.
Wow. Does it what is sort of your belief system at all when it comes to spirituality? Do you believe in God? Do you believe in gods? Do you have any of that?
I mean, I you know, it's of course it's a complex question, but I definitely believe that there's something else going on. I definitely believe that they are, quote unquote spirits or some type of other things out there that have a direct influence upon life here on Earth and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I do believe. I don't, I'm not a materialist. Like, I don't believe that only the material is what exists. I do
Mm.
believe there is something definitely else going on.
Interesting. Yeah. Look, I mean, I'm very intrigued by everything you have to offer here. We got gore, action, fantasy. How dark do you get with the kids' books, man? Are these kids like freaking out? Like, what is the darkest you get when you write children's stories?
Like, for example, because this came out maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Like, in one of the stories, it takes place in a kindergarten, so the kids are like 5 years old, and they know magic, but they're still learning how to use it. And one of the girls creates like something to kind of eat one of the other students because she's jealous of her. So that's about as dark as it gets. She's trying to,
Todd, would
but
you read your story to your future child?
I mean, I'm always reluctant to talk about the writing. I prefer people to read it because it's much more
No, I
funny.
love it.
It's funny, actually. It's kind of it's kind of cute, actually, the way it goes. She's a very fun character. She's selfish. She's selfish and she's jealous. And I think that's kind of a bit darker. She's always trying to take out her competition. But you have to keep in mind, this is like 6-year-olds. So, I mean, how much could she really do? And she's really mistaken a lot of times. Like, she makes rationalizations that are just not correct, but it's always kind of funny. So it's much more liar than I suppose that description I gave was
No, it
supposed to
sounds
be.
pretty great to me, man. I love it. Well, Todd, look, you can. I talked about your series. I mean, we've got the Windshine Chronicles books. We have the Vampire series of extreme horror, which the second book came out during all this coronavirus, past May. The Gray Man of Smoke and Shadows is the second book. Butchers is the first one. Love the cover, by the way. As someone that doesn't watch horror, I don't know if this was like your book publishers that did this, but the cover of Butchers is so 80s horror to me.
Yes, I want to thank my publisher, Nightmare Press. That was them. That had nothing to do with that.
I hope it doesn't like defy your. I think it works. I mean, I'm very intrigued. I love it.
No, I love the covers. I love the covers of Butchers and I love the covers of The Gray Man Smoking Shadows. I mean, I was very, very pleased when I saw the covers. So, no, I love them.
Do you think you can judge a book by its cover?
I think that yes. Sorry. I do think so because, I've seen so many books with very, very not good covers. And, I think it reflects the writing inside. I mean, if you go to a restaurant and the restaurant looks poor and really terrible and the setting is really poor and terrible, it kind of says something about the service you're going to end up getting. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be true. You go to a very bad looking restaurant, it could be fantastic service, fantastic food.
Yeah.
Still, I still think that presentation in general is important.
This is the soundbite I wanted. Todd Sullivan, artist, writer, author, but don't tell him that because he doesn't like it as much as artist, writer, artist. You've been on, and you are telling me that when it comes to the realm of literal books, you believe that it's okay, and perhaps we should judge books by their cover. I agree, man. I look at a book cover and I'm like, this looks like it's a good book. As a matter of fact, I did an early episode where I was reviewing book blurbs, and some had covers, and I reviewed them based on their cover, which was totally unfair to these authors. But you know what? I saw the value in judging books just because why not? It's covers are important. So I know that's not what you were saying. You have a little more depth than what I was bringing to the table, but you hear to hear, folks. I mean, definitely check out Butchers by Todd Sullivan, and I think you have some really interesting stuff going on. So I am excited to see what comes out after Butchers, after the rest of your series. Do you have a title for the third book yet?
For the third book, it's probably gonna be Chingu for the horror
For the
one.
vampire series of
Yeah, Chingu means friend in Korean, and then for the third book in the fantasy series, I'm almost finished that one, and right now it's called Blood Stew.
Oh my gosh. What is up with you eating and blood, man? I that's fascinating. What is blood stew? Or should you not tell us? You know what? Don't even tell me.
Right. Yeah, you can read the book. I mean, it's yeah, you can definitely read the book. You'll figure it out once you read the story.
All right. Well, look, we will definitely put links to all your books in this episode. Very interesting talking to you, Todd. So happy that you are able to take what's been a lifelong dream and keep living it. So it's been a pleasure chatting with you.
And thank you for having me. It's been a very intriguing conversation. Having me.
Oh, awesome. I'm glad. Thank you, Todd. Best of luck, and we'll stay in touch.
All right. Thanks.
I hope I didn't make Todd too uncomfortable. Though, like, talk about uncomfortable. My gosh, we're talking ripping people's faces off and torturing them while biting their necks and sucking out their blood. I mean, am I the one to, like, talk about, are we gonna blame me for all this here? Todd set me up, okay? I needed to figure out, if this guy who was writing a sequel to Time Traveler's Wife, like, this would have been a different interview in the first place. And I'm happy he didn't write that sequel, because guess what? No one wants fan fiction offshoots. That's what happened with 50 Shades of Grey. And, actually, wait, if that came from Twilight, and 50 Shades is more interesting kind of intellectually, and maybe we do. Todd, write the Time Traveler's Wife sequel, but include face ripping off. That's what the readers want, and that's what I want too. And all of you, I want you to have a wonderful week before Halloween experience. You're going to hear some very, very strange things coming up, including an interview with an alien entity on Halloween itself. Open loops. We're staying open all October. And it's still going to be Halloween once it ends. Take care.